Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and a happy Halloween to you. Happy Halloween. Now, my Halloween this year, like most years, I'm gonna, relax at home and dish out the candy to the little kids, the little trick-or-treaters who come by. Now, if you come to my house for tricks or treats, you're gonna get the good stuff. I'm not one of those people who hands out the milk duds or the Bit-O honeys. Those were the two worst chocolates when I was, I don't even know, you can't call them chocolates because they're the two worst candies that I ever got when I was a kid. Whenever I would go to somebody's house and say trick or treat, and I'd see them whip out a bag of Bit-O honey or milk duds, it was horrible, horrible. So I will never do that to another child because it's traumatic. So what I do is I hand out the good stuff. I hand out, the Reese's peanut butter cups, the Hershey's, you know what I mean? The good stuff. Every once in a while, if you're lucky, I'll mix in a little Ghirardelli, those Ghirardelli chocolates, the expensive ones. I'll get a few of those in there. And, so every time the kids come by and they see the chocolates and the candies that I give, it brings a smile to their face. And that's my donation to humanity, basically. So it makes me feel good. But we're here to discuss Asian horror films, so let's move on. And welcome to the final part of our voyage through Asian horror films released during 2007. Now this video, of course, represents my personal favorites from this particular year. So let's get cracking. Now the first one here tonight is a film from Thailand, and it is called The House. Now this is inspired by a true story, actually. You almost have to laugh every time a horror film is based on a true story, because 99.9% of the time it's either not true or horribly exaggerated, but let's, we'll give that a pass as usual. This is the story of 3 horrible murders that happened to 3 women in years past. A young reporter is curious as to the truth behind the 3 mysterious cases, so she starts searching for more information and answers behind the killer's motives. Now finally, she discovers the abandoned house where the 3 women were killed by their lovers. But when she takes her final steps into the cursed house, she finds something more frightening than she ever imagined waiting for her. So both the synopsis and the title of this film are pretty frickin' generic. The House? Really? The House? How good could this movie be? Well, I have to say that this is among the higher quality of Thai ghost films in my opinion. There are a few genre cliches along the way. The Japanese onryo makes a few appearances. But they are employed with some panache, with some style and effectiveness. And they exist as part of a fairly diverse set of scares, which include 10-foot-tall, lanky, shadowy ghost men. And you don't see those very much in horror films from any country. But in general, I do like how the scare tactics are executed in this film. I think it's pretty good in that regard. The finale, though, is actually fairly easy to predict and is projected fairly early on. So this is a film that you could probably predict what the ending is going to be like. But this movie, it makes no qualms about making a beeline towards an inevitable conclusion, but it gets to that conclusion at 100 miles an hour, so to speak, tossing in a boatload of horror elements along the way for maximum pacing. I think this film was very nicely paced. There's a lot of scares, and that's a good thing. Ton of horror in this one, and that's a positive. The lead actress is also very good in this, and you will recognize her probably, because she was also the lead actress in The Unborn from 2003 and Nang Nak from 1999. So if you enjoyed one or both of those films, it's another reason for you to check out The House. The House, in my opinion, is my personal favorite of this woman's particular filmography. So The House is, a part of a growing portfolio of solidly entertaining horror films from Thailand, which really started to kick some serious butt in this genre during like the mid-2000s. It really started to catch its stride. Because if you remember, some of the titles we were discussing during the late 90s, early 2000s, there were some good ones. But a lot of them were pretty dodgy and not very good at all. And that's being kind. So they really started to get a little bit more consistent around 2007 time period. Actually, starting with Shudder in 2004, they started getting more consistent. So that was good. And we actually have 2 more Thai horror films that we're going to cover a bit later in this video. So it's a good representation of the country tonight. Now, the DVD availability of the house is that it has a Region 2 UK DVD release. I don't think it was released in the United States, but I think it used to have an all-region DVD. You may be able to find that, but I think it's pretty tough to find. So you might have to focus on another region, so to speak, and you might be able to find it. All right, our next film here is one where we move to South Korea, and this one is called Muoi, The Legend of a Portrait. So a novelist visits her friend in Vietnam to research a legendary curse. So in an early scene, we're basically exposed to our protagonist, who is a backstabber, when it's revealed that she sold out one of her friends by exposing and exaggerating her love life while writing her latest novel, to increase sales and her reputation. But she's still under pressure from her editor to come up with something else. So this situation prompts her to visit Vietnam and meet the girl she recently backstabbed in order to get some juicy info on the legend that this girl is apparently familiar with. Now, we're not sure whether or not this friend of our protagonist is actually aware of the book that she wrote. And, because she lives in Vietnam, and the girl who backstabbed her lives in South Korea. And that's where the book was published, apparently. But nevertheless, there still seems to be some kind of, mind games between the two. Something doesn't seem quite right between these two. There's a certain animosity that kind of bubbles underneath the surface, and that may be left over from their younger years. And that dynamic between the two main characters is really what adds to some of the complexity and nuance to this film. You actually might recognize the supporting actress in this from Whispering Corridors 4, Voice. So it's nice to see her here as well. Her character tells the legend of Muoi little by little as the film progresses and moves along. And certain aspects of the main story between the two lead characters actually mirrors and parallels the story of Muoi in certain aspects, which it's kind of cool. There's a lot of parallels that are established in this movie, which I found interesting. The storytelling, I think, is probably the strongest aspect of this film. The scares themselves are a little bit derivative, especially near the beginning, but they gradually become more effective later on. There's a short but sweet portrait tunnel sequence that I really liked. And the finale is also very good, I thought. It's pretty interesting. There are 1 or 2 acts of violence that are hard to watch. They're not gory or anything like that. The violence in this is pretty tempered, but their implications and what they're inferring is enough to make you feel uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to watch at times, which is good in this case. The Vietnam setting also adds to, to making this a little bit different from other South Korean horror films. So Muoi, The Legend of a Portrait, I definitely recommend it. It's a good one. Now, availability of this one, it is widely available on DVD. And we stay, or actually, where are we going now? Are we going to Japan now? We are going to Japan. Alright, so we'll move back to South Korea in a few minutes, but we're going to Japan for our next one. And this is one that is quite entertaining. And that is X-Cross, also known as XX. From Japan, 2 schoolgirls travel to a remote spa for relaxation, but end up running from murderous, lunatic townspeople who perform rituals by dismembering women's legs, as well as a demented, one-eyed Lolita goth chick armed with massive scissors. Oh yeah, this is a fun one, as you may have guessed. The interesting aspect in this is that the girls arrive at the spa together, the 2 protagonists, but then they split up and are attacked in separate by the townspeople. So this film uses this angle to not only show entire stretches with only one girl at a time, which kind of gives you a sense of isolation, because each girl is kind of alone by themselves trying to survive. But there are also points where the events that the two girls experience intersect, and they intersect in kind of interesting ways, because you'll see a sequence with one girl, and then you'll see a sequence with the next girl, but there's a weird moment where they intersect and you didn't notice it. So I like that aspect of this. It's pretty cool. The violence is a bit limited in this. It's not particularly violent. There's really nothing in terms of gore, but there is a lot of atmosphere because the entire film takes place in a forest on a cool autumn night. In addition, the realism gets progressively less and less as the film rolls along, so it allows this movie to contribute one particular sequence that takes place in like a log cutting area. There's like a clearing in the forest where it looks like it's like a forestry complex, and they cut the logs there. And there's a scene that occurs in that clearing that is an instant classic in my opinion. I love it. There's a good dose of black humor present as well in this film, so it's pretty fun to watch. Now, the director here is Kenta Fukasaku, who previously directed the very disappointing Battle Royale 2, but don't hold that too much against him, because he did have Yo-Yo Girl Cop under his belt by this point, which I thought was pretty fun. I do think that X-Cross is probably this director's most purely entertaining movie, though. Now, in terms of criticisms, the acting, a bit dodgy at times. This isn't really a high-quality acting extravaganza. The opening half is a little bit on the slow side, but I think it sets things up nicely, and some of my favorite scenes are actually early on in this film. For example, there's one scene early on that shows like scarecrows in the fog as they're driving into the I guess you could say the spa resort, and I thought that was pretty creepy and cool. So I really like this film, X-Cross. I've rewatched it at least a half dozen times. I definitely recommend it. Now, availability of this film is that it is widely available on DVD. Alright, so as I promised, we move back to South Korea with another one that is pretty, this one is actually a faster paced film and quite a lot of fun. And that is Someone Behind You, also known as Voices, also known as Two People, because as you know, every South Korean horror film should have 3 different titles. A girl's acquaintances inexplicably attempt to kill her while in a state of temporary insanity. Now, after witnessing a family member thrown off a balcony by her fiancé and the violent stabbing of her aunt, a young woman comes to realize that she may be next in line. So she desperately tries to find out why those around her turn on her, and why she seems to be marked for death. So who can this girl trust? And where can she turn for help when it seems like everyone is out to get her? If only she could survive the murderous rage of friends and even her own family long enough to uncover the secret. So this movie really thrives on creating a sense of paranoia. The psychological effects come into play when our protagonist proves particularly difficult to kill, eluding a number of attacks from friends and family members. So in cases such as this, the attempted murders, from her perspective, they form kind of an unprecedented pattern that points towards some kind of supernatural or uncommon influence. Because if you think about it, why would every single friend and family member attempt to kill you for no reason whatsoever? So at this point, the possibility of a curse or supernatural influence no longer seems so far-fetched to the protagonist. In addition, paranoia kind of reaches its highest level, and the target of these murders will suffer greatly when attempting to reconcile these crazy events with their newly acquired mistrust and fear of their loved ones. So, I mean, this is a movie where, really, if you think about it and put yourself in the protagonist's shoes, it's actually pretty terrifying if you think about what's going on here, and I like that about it. There are a few bloody death scenes to enjoy in this one, and a very cool dream sequence with enough blood to fill a dump truck. I like that scene as well. Protagonist is very likable, so that's good. A good performance by the lead actress. Typical of South Korean horror, of course. One criticism that I have for this one is that the script is a bit too vague and ambiguous for its own good, leaving some gaps in the storyline. You could probably fill those gaps yourself after watching the movie a few times, but I can see why some people will get a bit frustrated and confused by this film. No spoilers here, of course, but I think when you finish the film and you realize what's behind it, you can kind of understand what, all the details, so to speak. But it doesn't explain everything to you, I'll tell you that much. This movie is definitely something a little bit different, and it's fast-paced, with a murder attempt lurking behind every corner. So this is fun stuff, I enjoyed it. So the availability of someone behind you is that it is widely available on DVD. In the US, it was released under the title Voices. So, alright. Now the next film tonight is another really good one. I think, we have 5 films left to cover from this year. All 5 of these films are contenders for Best Asian Horror Film of the Year. I really think so. I've tried my best to order them based on personal preference, but all 5 of these are pretty freaking solid and very entertaining. Now the first one here is, I think, somewhat underrated or underappreciated. And that is hair extensions, also known as Exte, from Japan. So customs agents discover a huge amount of human hair, along with a bald corpse of a young girl in a shipping container. Now, this arouses the curiosity of a mortuary employee with a hair fetish, particularly since the girl's hair continues to grow at a rapid pace. Now, a mad hair peddler with an endless stock of locks, this man sells his product to salons to be used for hair extensions for their customers. Meanwhile, an up-and-coming hairstylist is entrusted with the care of her timid and frightened niece, whose body bears the signs of abuse. It's not long before death surrounds them and their extension-wearing clientele. Now, this was directed by Sion Sono, who previously gave us such great films as Strange Circus and entertaining and somewhat perplexing films like Suicide Circle or Suicide Club. So hair extensions is definitely more tongue-in-cheek than those movies, with a heavy dose of black humor in this one. There are some ridiculous scenes in this movie that had me laughing out loud. Like, this movie's really funny at times. Definitely one of Sono's lighter films, but there are certainly a few scenes that have an edge to them, which helps to kind of balance the tone out. In addition, there's actually an admirable amount of effort developing the key characters in this, as well as important past events of these characters. Now, this may prove somewhat taxing or dull in other movies, but the storyline in this I found to be quite engaging, and the horror scenes nicely paced and effective. They're peppered throughout. You don't have to wait a long time in between the horror. And this proves to be a very entertaining experience, I think. The lead actress is Chiaki Kuriyama, who we've covered a few times already in this playlist. She's not the evil girl in this one. I know you may be used to seeing Chiaki Kuriyama as like the bad girl in movies, but not here. She's the good girl, and that allows her to show her softer, more dramatic side. I like her a lot in this movie. She's good. Very likable persona on screen, and her relationship with the little girl is nicely portrayed. Now, Ren Osugi, who is basically in every single Japanese movie made during the last 30 years, he plays the psycho mortuary employee in this, and he gets more screen time here than in a lot of his other films. And he definitely has a ball with his nutcase character. It seemed like he had a lot of fun making this one, so that's good. One character, though, I thought could have been handled a little bit better is, and it's not the actress's fault, is the irresponsible sister of Chiaki Kuriyama's character, who is just totally obnoxious. Like, the sister character in this is just over-the-top obnoxious. I know the film was intentionally going for that because she's kind of a human antagonist of sorts, but and her performance is consistent with some of the over-top elements of this film, but I do think they could have dialed her down a bit and maybe made her a little bit more multidimensional, in my opinion. The special effects in this are used successfully to create some crazy death scenes, because remember, it's all involving hair. And the last death scene is completely outrageous. It's one of the most ridiculous things I've ever seen, and I'm glad they did it. Hair extensions infuses some creativity and weirdness into things, while also kind of providing a little bit of satire regarding, the prevalence of hair in Japanese horror films. You think of Sadako, or a lot of the ghosts, the Onryo ghosts. There's a lot of hair-related horror related to that. Hair is showcased a little bit in those films. And this film kind of satirizes that because the amount of hair and hair extensions is insane. This has to have the record for the most hair in a film. It's ridiculous. And that also creates some very fantastic visuals, actually. Unique visuals, which I really liked. You actually do not get an Onryo ghost in this. You think with a movie about hair, cursed hair, you might get an Onryo Sadako clone rolling around. You really don't. So that's, you get a dead body. That's what you get. But it works. So again, I think this is one of Sion Sono's more underappreciated gems. Hair extensions. Hair extensions is moderately available on DVD. You might be able to get it used and new. Still pretty easy to find, though. Alright, our next film here. This is the high-quality flick. I rewatched this the other night, and it holds up. And this is a South Korean horror film called Epitaph. In February 1942, the fate of a handful of hospital employees and patients intertwined through 3 separate stories. So browsing an old photo book, an old man recollects his memories of those days in 1942 when Korea was occupied by Japan, and he was a young and immature intern doctor in a hospital. Now, during those 4 days, this film basically takes place during a 4-day time period. Strange events happen. When corpses brought to the mortuary aren't able to rest in peace. 3 intertwined stories follow, starting in reverse order. So, the first story here. While awaiting for his bride-to-be to arrive in Japan, the daughter of the hospital's director is the girl that he's waiting for. So he has a relationship with the director of the hospital. This young man is fascinated by a recently deceased young woman. He spends time near the corpse in the morgue and draws her face. It's then time for the deceased to return her appreciation. So this guy's a little bit of a weirdo, a little bit of a weirdo, but this is actually quite a good story here, and it has one very good scare sequence, I thought. The first story in Epitaph is very good. Now, the second story, Asako is a young girl who was the only survivor of a car accident which killed her family. She doesn't speak and appears to be in a state of shock, but what the doctors can't see is that she's being visited by the ghost of her dead mother. Now, I enjoyed the dramatic moments of this particular story a lot. I really like the lead actress a lot, and there are a few scary bits along the way, too. This second segment is my favorite story of this anthology. I really thought that it had a nice impact. Some outstanding visuals as well, which I'll get to in a minute. Now, the third story, serial killings of Japanese soldiers, continue, and a married couple, both surgeons, are responsible for the autopsies. Now, this third segment is definitely the most perplexing of all 3 stories. It has lots of twists and turns. This one twists and turns a lot. You may be asking yourself at times, where is this going? But it gets more interesting as it moves along. And there's no way you're going to predict who the murderer is and how things play out in general. There's just no way. It's so complicated. You're not going to be able to do it. And that's a good thing here. I do see some stylistic similarities in this to A Tale of Two Sisters at times, which is actually pretty nice. It doesn't come off as like a ripoff or anything, but it kind of adds to the quality overall. So in general, I think Epitaph has all of the bells and whistles of like a high-quality Asian horror film. It's got good acting, Very nice cinematography and set designs in this. An intelligent screenplay that makes you think. Some fantastic visuals in this that you will not forget anytime soon. The structure of the storylines are such that each begins with kind of a mysterious event that is explained more fully later on. There's also a heavy emphasis on motivation of the characters, as well as some psychological confusion of some of the characters. But I would say there's a lot of unpredictable turns of events in this that unfold within each story, and that makes it pretty interesting. There's also a very surrealistic vibe to this that I really enjoyed. It's a bit surrealistic, and one good thing about that is that it doesn't spoon-feed the viewer. You know, a lot of things are kind of inferred in this, which I really liked. Horror elements are classical, and the execution is very good. It's kind of a mature, refreshing experience with, you know, some creepy, beautiful sequences peppered along. So this is, you know, Epitaph really is a must-watch. Especially if you're a fan of, like, the classy South Korean horrors, like, you know, A Tale of Two Sisters, Acacia, etc. Now, the availability of Epitaph is that it is widely available on DVD. Much better luck in this video, right? I know in our last video, a lot of stuff was kind of hard to find, but a lot of these are easily attainable. Alright, now 3 films left, I believe, correct? Yes. And 2 of them are from Thailand. The first of which is surely, it's an unpopular opinion for, you know, best of the year kind of qualifications, but I don't care because I love it. I love this movie. And that is Sick Nurses from Thailand. Now, after killing one of their own, a group of organ-stealing nurses pay the consequences during one evening at their hospital. Now, I don't really want to say much more about the plot because there are some twists, some turns, and some surprises to behold. This is one of my favorite Thai horror films. Characters' personality quirks are exaggerated to the point where they are interesting to watch, and they also add an element of black humor. This is arguably also, if you're a guy out there, a heterosexual male, this is arguably the most beautiful ensemble cast for a film that I have ever seen in my life. I'm not joking. It's just insane. It's just, you know, just a random positive for you. So, the funny thing, like, regarding the black humor in this movie, some of it is pretty low-key. For example, at no point during this movie do any of the nurses tend to a patient, which just adds to the amusement. You know what I mean? Now, it does make sense, though. I've heard some people complain about this, like, well, they're nurses and they never tend to a patient in a 100-minute movie. Well, hold on a second. Hold on. Because the entire film takes place within a 20-minute period of time. Okay? The story basically replays events at different parts of the hospital with different characters during that 20-minute window. I don't know if it's exactly 20 minutes, it's something like that. Which is yet another great creative aspect of this film. So you'll have, you know, all the characters are together at the beginning, and then bam, you know, you have one woman, something happens to her during that 20-minute period. And then the film rewinds, and then shows you what happens to another nurse during that the same 20-minute period. And at times they intersect, you know what I'm saying? Which is kind of like X-Cross, but to like the 10th degree. Now, the ghost herself, because I've also heard people complain that, oh, this is another Asian ghost film. No, not another one. The ghost here shatters cliches because she's a merciless sadist, okay? And she reaps enjoyment from inflicting violence on the protagonists. You know, Sadako and the Japanese Onryo really don't show much of an enjoyment, so to speak, over the misery of their victims. So this is very different in Sick Nurses and quite entertaining because she's loving it at times. It's pretty entertaining. Another interesting element is that the final human girl in this, to use an American slasher term, is not a particularly moral person. I mean, these nurses are not good people, okay? And you still feel the desire to root for her. if for no other reason that she's like a tough cookie. You know what I mean? She just survives this stuff. And you're not quite sure which nurse is going to be the final girl until the end. But the one that kind of survives it all, you're like, man, this girl's pretty tough. You know what? I hope she survives. So that was pretty cool. Some of the main attractions of this film are the death scenes, many of which arrive during the later half. These are imaginative, with impressive quantities of blood, and are fun to watch. It's a great example of well, before I get to that, like the first half of this movie, and I don't want to spoil anything, but there's like death scenes that cut off. You know, a nurse will be attacked by the ghost and it'll cut off. And you'll probably be saying to yourself, wow, you know, I kind of wish that death scene was better. But just be patient, because the movie comes back to that scene later on and shows you the death. So if if early on you get a little frustrated with the lack of gore or violence, don't worry, because the second half delivers. I'll just tell you. This isn't, I don't want you to go into this expecting like a French horror film from the 2000s, like Inside or High Tension or Martyrs. It doesn't get that excessive, but it does have a nice quantity of blood and violence for those who like that type of thing. And, oh yeah, as I was saying, this film is a great example of how a ghost can use supernatural powers and trickery to make it almost impossible for a human being to escape from a building. You know, in this case, a hospital. And that's one advantage of supernatural films. You know, if you have a slasher, a lot of times there's usually a scenario where the character could call the cops or could run out the back door instead of walking upstairs. In this film, you're trapped in this freaking hospital, and this ghost is not letting you out. It doesn't matter what you do. You know, so that kind of adds, or it kind of subtracts from the dumb character decision-making that you see in horror films sometimes. Another nice positive, I have more nice things to say, is that the pacing is brisk, the camera work is interesting, and the lighting is very colorful and atmospheric. There's a lot of use of pink, green, and yellow in this movie, which I liked. I love colorful horror films. Love them. And that's another reason to see this film. Now, one negative thing I would say is that there are a few brief shots of low-grade CGI that sticks out a bit. You know, it just kind of takes you out of the film a little bit. But there's only like literally 2 scenes with it, so it's not that big of a deal. So, Sick Nurses is a creative horror film that I love to rewatch, and I definitely recommend it. Sick Nurses is widely available on DVD. Alright, and another Thai horror film's coming up. It was really hard to order these. You know, technically Sick Nurses I watch more often, but our next film has such a nice overall quality to it that I gave it a little bit of an edge on this list. And that is Alone. Now this tells the story of Pim, who moved to a new home to escape the guilt of being the surviving half of a conjoined twin. Now flashbacks to Pim's childhood show how the bittersweet relationship with her sister and their commitment to stay together forever transforms into a repressive bond that ultimately leads to a separation. Now, after she returns to visit her dying mother, the spirit of her dead sister angrily thrusts herself into Pim's life. Now, this is one of those horror films that relies heavily on the characters, the drama, and the storylines that are very properly developed. Very good quality film. This is especially important as it slowly and efficiently escalates the conflicts, which lead to one of the most exciting finales of any horror film of the last decade. I really like the finale in this, and it might not be something that you're expecting, I'll tell you that much. Acting and sound design of this film are very strong. I really like the lead actress in this film a lot, and have not seen her in much else. I think I saw her in one other horror film that we'll get to maybe in 2009. She's very good. I wish I would see her more often. She has a very classy look to her. The way she delivers her lines and mannerisms are very classy, and that creates a very likable protagonist, I think. Back to the sound design, there are a few too many jump scares for my liking in this one. It's one thing about Thai horror. sometimes I just think they put in just a few too many jumps, just my opinion. But this small negative is easily overpowered by a number of well-executed creative horror scenes. Now, this should be no surprise, because Alone was directed by the same people who gave us Shudder, another very impressive Thai horror film from 2004. This has the same proficiency and professionalism prayer that can help you stay engaged and entertained. So Alone is a very nice, high-quality film. It doesn't get as much recognition as Shudder simply because it... let me see the DVD availability. I don't think this film was ever released in the States. If it was for a limited period of time, which is ridiculous, because Shudder is probably the most popular Thai horror film internationally of all time. So it doesn't make any sense to me why, the same directors come again with another Thai horror film 3 years later, and it doesn't have a wide release. I know Alone had an all-region DVD release back in the day, which I have in my collection. But, yeah, it's weird. This film definitely deserves a little bit more attention. And as I said, it's kind of difficult to find. You may have to go for like a Region 3 DVD release or Region 2 if you could find it. But it's definitely worth seeking out. Alright. So, now the best Asian horror film of 2007, as I said, it's really hard to order these final set of films. But I gotta give the title maybe to South Korea in this one. South Korea. And that is Hansel and Gretel. Alright, so after a car accident, a man finds shelter in a secluded home of 3 children. But every time he attempts to leave through the surrounding forest, he inexplicably has no way out and is forced to return to the children's residence. So needless to say, something odd is going down here. And, most of the online reviews I've read or watched have given too much away in terms of plotting. So I'm not going to say much more in that regard. That's the plot line you get from me. Now, obviously, the children have a key role to play in all this. That's all I'll say. Now, this film relies heavily on the primary conflict and scenario, and it pulls it off very nicely with a well-written script, well-developed characters, and a surprisingly touching storyline. Some of the themes here have been seen elsewhere, but the manner in which they're presented feels refreshingly different. This definitely has a fairy tale vibe to it. Definitely has a fairy tale type vibe. And as the title Hansel and Gretel implies, the story is actually very different from the fairy tale, but it does have some references to it. Now, one of the things that pops out immediately when watching this movie are the cinematography and the set designs, which are really good in this. They are really good. Quite a bit of eye candy to behold in this one. The weather season is set mostly in late autumn, early winter, which conveys a chilly mood. And there are some Christmas visuals, like lighting, decorations, clothing, etc. They run rampant throughout much of the middle section, so that's very nice. Another cool thing about this film is that it nicely avoids most of the dumb decision-making that we see in horror films, a lot like Sick Nurses. When you look at the lead protagonist, there's not a whole lot that this guy can do to get out of here. The protagonist can't escape through conventional means or force, which forces him to attempt to think and manipulate his way out of the situation. And that's where a lot of the intrigue comes in. The ending to this film is both dramatic and emotional. I got a little choked up at the end of this one, so you could tell it has a very nice dramatic impact to it. Hansel and Gretel. Availability of this one, moderately available on DVD, both used and new, similar to hair extensions. Alright, so that's 2007. That concludes our journey through Asian horror films from 2007. But don't worry, because we have plenty of years left to cover. Be sure to join me for my next video where we'll crack into 2008. And as always, we'll see you next time.